The midnight flames licked at the plastic, fumes rising as the fire roared. Sarah watched in horror as her beloved trash can, her last connection to normalcy, was reduced to ash. The culprit, her own homeowners association, caught in the act by a security camera. Now she faces a choice: accept their twisted version of justice or take matters into her own hands. Sarah stared in disbelief as the last embers of her trash can flickered out. The acrid smell of burnt plastic hung heavy in the air, as the homeowners association representative shifted uncomfortably beside her. "This was a necessary action," he said, his voice dripping with forced empathy. "Your can was in clear violation of community standards. We had no choice." Sarah's fists clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. "No choice?" She spat. "You crept onto my property in the dead of night and destroyed my personal property. That was a choice, and a criminal one at that." The representative raised a hand, as if to silence her. "Now let's not get ahead of ourselves. The police have been notified, and they've determined this was a justified act by the HOA. No laws were broken." Sarah's jaw dropped. "Justified? You're telling me the fire department called this arson justified?" Her voice rose with each word, trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "The fire department concluded it was an accidental fire," the representative said coolly. "Regrettable, but necessary. You know the rules, Sarah. Your can didn't meet code. We had to take action." Sarah felt the world spin around her. "Accidental?" She spat. "I have it all on camera. You bastard. You set my can on fire while I was sleeping." The representative sighed, shaking his head. "I understand you're upset, but making accusations won't change anything. The decision has been made. Now, I suggest you go purchase a new can that meets our standards. We wouldn't want any further incidents." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah alone in the smoldering ruins of her property. She stared at the charred remains, her mind racing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sarah spent the next few days in a fog of anger and disbelief. She replayed the security footage over and over, watching the hooded figure creep across her lawn and set her can ablaze. The damning evidence was clear, but the HOA's cover-up seemed impenetrable. At the next community meeting, Sarah stormed in, the video queued on her phone. "Everyone needs to see this," she shouted, interrupting the droning discussion of landscaping violations. The representative from the previous night shot her a warning glare. "Sarah, I must ask you to refrain from disrupting our proceedings. If you have a concern, you can address it through the proper channels." "Proper channels?" Sarah scoffed. "You mean the channels where you get to lie and sweep everything under the rug?" She thrust her phone toward the crowd. "I have proof right here that your precious HOA committed arson on my property. Are you all just going to sit here and let them get away with it?" The room erupted in murmurs and whispers. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of where to direct their allegiance. The representative cleared his throat, his composure cracking. "Now let's not get carried away. I understand you're upset, but making unfounded accusations will only lead to more conflict. We are a community, and we must work together." "Work together?" Sarah shouted. "You destroyed my property in the middle of the night. How is that working together?" The representative raised a hand, his voice turning stern. "That is enough, Sarah. If you continue to disrupt this meeting, I will have no choice but to call the police and have you removed." Sarah's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on her phone. This was far from over. Over the next few days, Sarah's anger only grew. She replayed the security footage endlessly, her mind churning with ways to expose the HOA's treachery. Sleep eluded her as she plotted her next move, determined to hold the association accountable. One afternoon, as she was browsing online, a glimmer of hope caught her eye. A local news article detailed a recent lawsuit against an HOA for abusing its power and retaliating against a homeowner. Inspired, Sarah reached out to the reporter, desperate to share her story. The reporter, Samantha, listened intently as Sarah recounted the midnight arson and the HOA's blatant cover-up. "This is outrageous," Samantha said, her brow furrowed. "I can't believe the fire department ruled it an accident. Do you have any other evidence?" Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming. "The security footage is just the beginning. I've been doing some digging, and I found a pattern of the HOA targeting homeowners who don't comply with their ridiculous rules." Samantha's pen flew across her notepad. "This could be a major story. If you're willing to go on record, I'd like to do a full investigation." Sarah felt a surge of hope. "Absolutely. I'll do anything to bring these people down. They can't just destroy my property and get away with it." Over the next few days, Samantha worked tirelessly, interviewing other homeowners and combing through HOA records. The more she uncovered, the more convinced she became that Sarah's case was just the tip of the iceberg. As the publication date of the article approached, Sarah braced herself for the fallout. She knew the HOA would not go down without a fight, but she was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. The day the article was published, Sarah's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors, both sympathetic and outraged, called to express their support or outrage. The HOA representative, however, remained conspicuously silent. That is, until Sarah received a letter in the mail, a thinly veiled threat from the HOA's lawyers. "Cease and desist all further public statements and activities against the association," it read, "or face the consequences of your actions." Sarah's heart raced as she read the ominous words. The HOA was clearly not going to back down without a fight. But she refused to be intimidated. She took the letter to Samantha, who immediately contacted her own legal team. "This is a clear attempt to silence you," Samantha said, her eyes narrowed. "But we're not going to let them get away with it. We'll file a countersuit for harassment and violation of your free speech rights." Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Good. I'm not going to let them bully me into submission. I'm going to fight this to the end." In the days that followed, the legal battle escalated. The HOA's lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to block the news story and prevent Sarah from speaking out. But Samantha and her team fought back, unearthing more evidence of the association's abuses. The community was in an uproar, with some residents rallying behind the HOA and others standing firmly with Sarah. Neighbors turned against neighbors as the tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch. Sarah found herself at the center of the maelstrom, her every move scrutinized and her every word dissected. But she refused to back down, driven by a burning desire for justice and a deep-seated mistrust of the HOA's power. As the legal battle dragged on, Sarah's life became a whirlwind of court dates, media interviews, and heated community meetings. The HOA's representatives were relentless in their efforts to discredit her, painting her as a disgruntled homeowner with a personal vendetta. But Sarah refused to be silenced. She stood her ground, her voice unwavering as she presented the damning evidence against the association. Samantha and her legal team worked tirelessly, uncovering more and more instances of the HOA's misconduct. The community was divided, with some residents staunchly defending the HOA and others rallying behind Sarah. Neighbors who had once been friendly now eyed each other with suspicion, unsure of where their loyalties should lie. Sarah found herself the target of vicious rumors and anonymous threats. Her mailbox was vandalized and her tires were slashed. She knew the HOA was behind it all, but proving it was another matter entirely. "They're trying to break me," Sarah told Samantha, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "But I won't let them. I have to keep fighting, for myself and for everyone else they've hurt." Samantha nodded sympathetically. "I know it's been a long and difficult battle, but we're making progress. The more we uncover, the stronger our case becomes. We're going to make them accountable for their actions, I promise." Sarah took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "I'm not going to give up. Not now. Not ever. This is about more than just my trash can. It's about standing up to the abuse of power and the corruption that's been allowed to fester in our community. As the battle raged on, Sarah knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The future of her community hung in the balance, and she was determined to come out on top. The tension in the neighborhood reached a boiling point as the legal battle between Sarah and the HOA dragged on. Neighbors who had once been friendly now eyed each other with suspicion, unsure of where their loyalties should lie. Sarah's home became the target of constant harassment. Her mailbox was vandalized, her tires were slashed, and her lawn was repeatedly covered in trash. She knew the HOA was behind it all, but proving it was another matter entirely. Undeterred, Sarah continued to speak out, rallying her neighbors to join her in the fight against the association's abuses. Samantha and her legal team worked tirelessly, uncovering more and more evidence of the HOA's misconduct. The media attention surrounding the case only intensified, with news outlets from across the region covering the unfolding drama. Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight, her every move scrutinized and her every word dissected. As the trial date approached, the HOA's representatives grew increasingly desperate. They tried to have the case dismissed, arguing that Sarah's actions were simply the result of a personal vendetta. But the judge saw through their tactics, ruling that the evidence was too compelling to ignore. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial, with both sides of the community packing the benches. Sarah sat at the table, her shoulders squared, her eyes fixed on the judge. She knew that the outcome of this case would have far-reaching consequences, not just for her own future, but for the entire neighborhood. As the proceedings unfolded, the damning evidence against the HOA mounted. Witness after witness took the stand, recounting their own experiences of harassment and abuse at the hands of the association. The jury listened with rapt attention, their faces etched with a growing sense of outrage. In the end, the verdict was clear. The HOA had abused its power, engaging in a systematic campaign of intimidation and retaliation against homeowners. The judge ordered the association to pay hefty fines and implement sweeping reforms to its policies and procedures. Sarah watched as the HOA representatives filed out of the courtroom, their heads hung low. She felt a sense of vindication, but also a deep sense of sadness for the division that had torn her community apart. Yet, she knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over. In the aftermath of the trial, the community was left reeling. The HOA's defeat had been a major victory for Sarah and her supporters, but the scars of the bitter feud would not heal easily. Neighbors who had once been friends now eyed each other with suspicion, unsure of where their loyalties lay. The once vibrant community spirit had been shattered, replaced by a tense and uneasy atmosphere. Sarah knew that the work was far from over. The HOA had been ordered to implement sweeping reforms, but she was determined to ensure that they followed through. She formed a new neighborhood watch group, recruiting volunteers to monitor the association's activities and report any signs of wrongdoing. Samantha, the intrepid reporter who had helped uncover the HOA's misdeeds, continued to follow the story, providing regular updates to the public. She interviewed neighbors, chronicling their experiences with the association and the lasting impact of the conflict. The HOA, for its part, seemed cowed by the court's ruling and the public scrutiny. They made a show of implementing the ordered changes, but Sarah and her allies remained vigilant, unwilling to let their guard down. As the months passed, the community slowly began to heal. Neighbors who had once been at odds started to rebuild their relationships, recognizing the need for unity in the face of the HOA's abuses. Sarah, too, found herself at the center of a newfound sense of community pride. Her neighbors, once skeptical of her crusade, now saw her as a hero, a symbol of the power of standing up to injustice. Yet, even as the community began to mend, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The HOA, she knew, would not let this defeat stand idly by. They would be plotting their revenge, determined to regain the power they had lost. The uneasy calm in the community was shattered one night when Sarah's home was the target of a brazen act of vandalism. Neighbors awoke to find her front yard covered in trash, her mailbox smashed, and her car tires slashed. Sarah knew immediately who was behind the attack. The HOA, she was certain, had orchestrated this retaliation, unwilling to accept their defeat in court. Fuming with rage, Sarah called the police and filed a report, but she knew that the odds of the culprits being caught were slim. The HOA had deep pockets and a network of loyal supporters within the community, making it difficult to prove their involvement. Undeterred, Sarah doubled down on her efforts to keep a watchful eye on the association's activities. She organized neighborhood patrols, recruited volunteers to monitor the HOA's meetings, and continued to work closely with Samantha and her legal team. As the investigation into the vandalism stalled, Sarah found herself the target of renewed harassment. Anonymous calls, threatening letters, and even a brick thrown through her window. The HOA was pulling out all the stops to intimidate her. But Sarah refused to be cowed. She stood her ground, her resolve only growing stronger with each new attack. She knew that the HOA was desperate, that they were lashing out with increasing desperation as their power slipped away. Finally, after months of relentless effort, a breakthrough came. One of the neighborhood volunteers, a retired police officer, managed to capture footage of a HOA representative sneaking onto Sarah's property in the dead of night. With this damning evidence in hand, Sarah and her legal team went back to court, demanding justice for the campaign of harassment and retaliation. The judge, outraged by the HOA's flagrant disregard for the previous ruling, imposed even harsher penalties and ordered the association to be placed under close supervision. As the gavel came down, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. The battle had been long and arduous, but in the end, justice had prevailed. The HOA's reign of terror had been brought to an end, and the community could finally begin to heal.